Right guys, this is the first of the Unit 3 topics in Higher, which covers the neurobiology topic. So we're talking about the brain, the spinal cord, how we respond to external stimuli, how our nervous system's involved in that, a little bit of the structure of the brain, etc. This is a very simple topic. There's not an awful lot of information in it. I have tried to summarise the content of the topic behind me, and I'm just going to talk you through it. This is the first part of it, the structure and layout of the nervous system in general, just a kind of overview, some of which you'll have met before, some of you might remember from quite recently. What I would say is that if you are unfamiliar with the control and communication topic in National 5, I'd advise you to go and watch that video in the National 5 video. So control and communication covers a bit about the nervous system and then also about hormones. Now it's really the nervous system part that I want you to be sure of. I will be repeating everything you need to know from National 5 during this video, so it's not essential, as long as you're understanding what I'm saying. If you're not quite sure what I'm referring to, it might be worth going back to watch that video, but watch this one first and see how you go, right? So, to start off with, without any further ado, we're going to talk about the nervous system and how it is split up. It's considered to be two main parts. The central nervous system, which we'll deal with that a bit first actually. This is purely lifted straight from the National 5 course. The central nervous system, or CNS, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Now we'll learn a wee bit more about the structure of the brain in the fullness of time, but what you really need to know, or what you understood from National 5, is the brain is receiving signals and sending signals out, and it's using the spinal cord to do that. So the way it gets its signals from the rest of the body and the way it gets its signals to the rest of the body is it uses the spinal cord. So you've got the brain obviously in the head, and then the spinal cord running down the spine. Any signals are sent down, just to remind you, they're sent down motor neurons, and any signals that are being received are being sent back up the spinal cord to the brain, and those are being sent through sensory neurons. So that's your two kind of message carrying neurons. You also have interneurons involved in reflex actions, which might be worth a wee check on our National 5 website if you can't quite remember that. On to the other type of nervous system, if you like, the other half of the nervous system. So beyond the brain and the spinal cord, the nervous system has to be all about doing things, causing responses, receiving information, and beyond the spinal cord there has to be a connection to the environment around us, so through sensory organs or potentially to muscles and glands where signals are being sent to. And the part of the nervous system which is involved in all of that, the external stuff, is called the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. So that's every nerve beyond the brain and the spinal cord, basically. So all the nerves that go out to all the parts of your skin and your eyes and your ears and your nose and also all your muscles, all the stuff that connects your body to your spinal cord is defined as being the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. And the PNS has got two parts to it as well. So very briefly, the somatic nervous system, remember whenever you see the word somatic, it refers to the body, right? So the somatic nervous system, that consists of those nerves that I mentioned beforehand, the motor neurons and the sensory neurons. Right? So any signal being sent into the spinal cord is through sensory neurons, and any signal being sent out of the spinal cord is through motor neurons. Motor neurons are generally connected to muscles or glands. We use the word effector to basically because they cause an effect. And sensory neurons are connected to sensory organs like your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your skin. So receiving signals through the spinal cord or to the spinal cord or sensory neurons, sending signals out towards muscles and glands from the spinal cord is through motor neurons, and that's what we call the somatic nervous system. Alright? Now, this is the part of the nervous system that you may recognise from very recent times, because we actually talked about this in the context of the heart. Now, we use this word autonomic to describe the part of the nervous system which is involved in things that our body does without us really thinking about it. So things like your heart rate, things like your breathing rate, things like the activity of your digestive system, that's controlled by the nervous system, but not consciously. You don't walk about all day thinking, oh, I better keep my heart beating, I better not forget to keep breathing. It's not how the breathing system, the heart rate, or indeed your digestive system, how that works. It is controlled by the ANS, the Autonomic Nervous System, which is, as I said, things that your body does that you don't necessarily know about. And that splits into two words which you should recognise from the heart rate topic. That is sympathetic and parasympathetic. And in terms of thinking about what those two things do, those two sort of halves of the autonomic nervous system do, what I was going to try and do here, I've got a heart and breathing rate, and I've also got peristalsis and intestinal secretion. So that's the activity of your heart rate and breathing rate. Remember the sympathetic system, I mentioned this in the video before, but the idea of being sympathetic, you're sort of going, oh, it's kind of the opposite from that. Sympathetic nervous system is for fight or flight, it gets you wound up. So actually, what it will do is it will increase heart rate and breathing rate. That's what the sympathetic nervous system does with the help of noradrenaline, remember? That's certainly when it comes to the heart. On the other hand, if you are in a fight or flight mode, your body doesn't want to concentrate on its digestive system. It's not interested in increasing intestinal secretions or making sure that wee sandwich that you had before you get scared by the big lion or whatever gets pushed through your digestive system. So the blood and attention, if you like, is taken away from the digestive system by the sympathetic system. So the sympathetic system reduces the amount of peristalsis and the amount of intestinal secretions that are going on. Exactly the opposite is true of the parasympathetic system. Remember, the parasympathetic system we associate with acetylcholine, and what it does is it will reduce the heart rate or breathing rate. It will bring your heart rate breathing rate down. This is what would, instead of being called fight or flight response, the parasympathetic system is called rest and digest, and it's well named because it allows you to bring your heart rate and breathing rate down, but it also increases the amount of peristalsis and intestinal secretions that it does. So take, for example, a cheetah. What a cheetah will do after it's hunted and had its fill, it will find a tree and it will go and climb up in that tree, and it will sleep in that tree or lie in that tree for days on end. After it's had its big meal, it literally is unable to do much else, because what's happened is its sympathetic system has absolutely kicked in to give it the energy, the oomph to go and catch that antelope, attack and eat it. But as soon as the switch goes from its autonomic nervous system switches from sympathetic to parasympathetic, we go from fight or flight to rest and digest. The heart rate, breathing rate, that all comes right down, and more attention, more oomph, if you like, is given to the peristalsis and intestinal secretions, so it rests and digests. Okay, so that's how the autonomic nervous system divides up. And I'm going to step out the way of it because I think that is worthwhile pausing and having a think about how it all divides up. So you've got the nervous system, the central nervous system splits into the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system involves all the nerves which are not part of the brain and spinal cord. So, somatic nervous system, the motor and sensory neurons that I mentioned before, the idea that signals are sent to and from the spinal cord by these guys. And then the autonomic nervous system, which brings us on to the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, which, as I said, you should be kind of aware of by now. Okay, so that's probably worth as well mentioning. Sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Okay, so like I said, that might be worth a pause and a think about, and if you're still not sure, you can rewind and go back over that. But I would expect you would be able to replicate that flow diagram really and be able to tell me how the nervous system splits up. So that's the first of the two parts of this topic. So give me a wee chance to rub this board, and then we're going to talk about the actual journey that signals take through the nervous system. Okay, so really what we're concentrating on, I suppose, is the somatic nervous system. I'll leave that just up on the board, just prolong its time on the board to try and let you understand that that's what we're going to be focusing on. At National 5 level, it's explained to you that if a signal wants to get from, let's say for example, a signal wants to get from your tip of your finger, where you might have pricked your finger with a pin, for the pain to be sent up to your brain, what's explained to you is that it travels through nerve cells all the way up your arm, into your spinal cord, up to your brain, where you'll detect pain, and then a signal will be sent from the brain down the spinal cord, then out through motor nerves to a muscle, at which point you'll pull your hand away from the source of pain, right? But what's also explained to you at National 5 is that that's not a continuous flow of information all the way through one single cable, if you like, all the way up to your brain. It's not like that. It's lots and lots and lots of individual little nerve cells. So if we've got the pain at one end, and we want that pain to get to the brain, I don't deliberately rhyme, but there we go. So there's the brain, spinal cord. We want the signal to be sent from the pain, it's the actual source of the pain, it's sent through sensory neurons. Eventually it gets to the spinal cord and it's sent up to the brain. Now, I have deliberately drawn many individual little nerve cells because it's really important to understand that. What happens is an electrical impulse is carried through a nerve cell, but the space between this is called a synapse. The space between is where a chemical is transported, called neurotransmitter, and we'll learn a lot more about neurotransmitter in the third of these topics. But at the moment, all we really need to understand is that actually it's not a single continuous run of information of one single big cable. It's in individual little cells. So it's an electrical impulse, chemical release, electrical impulse, chemical release, electrical impulse, chemical release, and so on and so forth until you actually get the signal to where you want to get it to. Okay? What we have to get our head around is that actually what I've drawn here is usually more complex than that, right? It's not just going to be one single row of nerve cells. Very often, you will be receiving signals from several different places. So take, for example, your temperature detection. You know generally how warm or cold you are at any one time. If you stop and think about it, think, well, I'm warm or I'm cold, right? You find that out because you're being sent signals from several different places that are collecting that information together. Right? So the information is being collected from several different places and giving you the brain one picture. Right? That story that I've just painted there, that picture, is called a converging neuropathway. Converging. All that converging means, those of you that haven't seen that word before, it just means coming together, right? So converging pathway is all the signals collecting together to give one big, here's the temperature, right? Now, that's one way in which nerve neural pathways can be connected together as a converging pathway, but actually we have the opposite can also be true. I want you to think very carefully about writing, right, for a little second. So if I was to send the instruction to my hand to write my name, I can do it pretty easily. Now obviously a small child struggles to do that, but any of us would be able to write our name without really having to think too hard about it. But actually what you've got to think about is all the things your body had to do in order to make that happen. Yeah, your brain's just sent one signal, write your name, but actually think about all the different muscles and parts of your arm and parts of even the stance I had to take to get into the right position and to pick the pen up and all the different things that were involved from the one signal from the brain. That has to go to several different places in the body. So basically what I've described there with the converging pathway, something like writing or doing something quite technical, like, you know, not even ridiculously technical, but let's say like screwing a screw in with a screwdriver. That's a technical thing which starts in the brain as one instruction. So you've got your brain, there's the spinal cord, and you think to yourself, write your name, and that instruction is sent down the spinal cord, down through motor nerves and out. But ultimately that's going to have to go to your wrist, it's going to have to go to your forearm, it's going to have to go to your shoulder, it's going to have to go to your legs and your knees, it's going to have to position your feet, it's going to have to go to your fingers. So that one instruction, instead of different information collecting together and going to the brain, this is where the opposite is true. This is where one signal is leaving the brain and heading off to all different parts of the body, and we call that a diverging pathway. Diverging pathway. And again, if you have ever met that word before, if two things diverge, it means they go their separate ways, they go out from the one point, and that's exactly what's happening here. So we have converging neural pathways, we have diverging neural pathways, and the final one of the three pathways we have to understand is where sometimes we want the pathway to kind of reinforce itself. So if a signal's sent down a particular pathway, we want for the pathway to keep repeating. So what happens is, got the brain, again, spinal cord, signal sent down along to wherever its destination is, but now and again we will actually send a signal back into itself again. And that allows for the pathway, a signal will go that way, but a signal will also go back and reinforce part of the pathway. That's what's called a reverberating pathway. Alright, so to summarise everything we covered there, this topic deals first of all with understanding that the nervous system is really of two parts. You've got the central nervous system made of the brain and spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system, which is made up of two parts, the somatic nervous system, which is your sensory and motor neurons, control everything you feel and everything you do. And then your autonomic nervous system, which is a different part of your nervous system which you don't have any real control over. That controls your heart rate and breathing rate, and also your digestive system, so your intestinal secretions, so your small intestine and what they secrete, and the process of peristalsis, which is the squeezing of food through the digestive system. The autonomic nervous system, as we mentioned, splits into two parts. We have the sympathetic system, which is for fight or flight, so increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, decreased intestinal secretions and decreased peristalsis. And then we also have the parasympathetic system, which is for rest and digest, which reduces your heart rate, reduces your breathing rate, and increases your intestinal secretions and increases your rate of peristalsis. That was really the sort of the first part of the topic, and in the second part we deal with the three types of neural pathway that exist. So we have pathways where one signal is sent from the brain and sent out to all different places. They call that a diverging pathway. Did that one second. But the first one I dealt with was the idea that actually sometimes your brain is collecting information from several places in the body, and that information has been collected through eventually into the one neural pathway. That's what we call a converging pathway. So we have diverging pathways and converging pathways, and what's on the board behind me is the third type of pathway, which is a reverberating pathway, where the signal is actually carried in whatever direction it's to be carried in, but also is reversed back and reinforces parts of the pathway, and that allows for a pathway to be maintained. So we have converging, diverging and reverberating. Okay, right, that should be enough to do this next homework. I am going to mention, because I forgot to mention it, and I really do want to push home the idea that cholesterol can be controlled by drugs called statins. Now, the only reason I mentioned this is because I noticed it was in the homework exercise and I didn't actually say that in my video. It is in your notes, but I didn't state it in the video. So that little aside is for the previous topic. Okay, I'm going to post this video just now. I'm going to post the homework this week. We will continue to work through in this way throughout the Easter holidays, so please be prepared for that. There will be another 3 videos for this topic and another 3 homework exercises for this topic as well. Okay? Right, thanks folks.